I mean, there's a sense that pervades the Martin budget and the prevailing orthodoxy that we're doomed to stagnation, high unemployment, high real interest rates, and we really challenge that.
There's not just one kind of budget.
By putting forward an alternative budget, we can prove that the objectives of our country should be to look after people.
Special report. Budget 96.
Budget time in Ottawa. A moment that Canadians eagerly await each year. Loved ones gather in the family room, turn up the television, and watch just about anything else because they know the budget isn't meant for them.
Hello, I'm Arthur Papp, and this is Money Matters, your program of financial advice. Today's letter comes from Mary Wade of Halifax, and Mary writes, "Dear Arthur, why is it that media financial advisors always act as if every TV viewer had thousands of dollars to invest in tax shelters, when most of us barely have enough at the end of the year to pay for a bottle of sparkling Canadian wine? Wouldn't most Canadians be better off if some of these tax shelters that you recommend were closed, giving the government more money to spend on social programs?" Bitter. Bitter. Well, Mary, I suppose it is true that it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to advise you to max out your RRSPs when in fact you're living from paycheck to paycheck. On the other hand, who cares? I'm Arthur Papp, and this is Money Matters, not you.
That there's a bigger picture to choices that we make.
Yet since 1995, some Canadians who feel that people matter more than money have been producing their own alternative budgets. These budgets make it clear there are alternatives to the federal government's strategy of cutting health and education funding and laying people off.
We prefer an approach which puts people back to work, increases their ability to pay taxes, and reduces demands on the budget for UI and social assistance payments.
Our budget proposes to have more access to post-secondary education. Our budget would mean that there will probably be fewer people living in the streets. And our budget would mean that kids have actually a better start at life.
The alternative budget process is becoming an annual event in Canada. Perhaps you think this country needs 2 budgets a year about as much as it needs 2 winters a year. But maybe we should all think again.
However, Martin is not expected to increase personal taxes.
If you believed the media, budgets are about just one thing: taxes. A good budget cuts taxes. A bad budget raises them. The drumbeat starts about 6 months before the budget comes down.
With no tax increases. This should satisfy both financial markets.
The message reaches a fever pitch in the days before the budget comes down.
We're going to hit the debt wall.
Reduce spending. Down to zero spending.
The debt wall.
Under control.
The business community does not have an alternative budget process. It has the budget process. They don't need to hold rallies on Parliament Hill to get the government to reverse its economic policy. They march on Ottawa every day. In fact, they march right into the finance minister's office.
The attack on the deficit is irrevocable and irreversible.
The business leaders have a simple message. The finance minister has no choice, no option, but to cut services and lay people off. The only question we should ask ourselves is, did my taxes go up?
Hello, I'm Arthur Papp, and this is Money Matters, your program of financial advice. Today I'd like to talk about how last night's budget affects the average Canadian. The government has wisely cut back on seniors' pensions, social assistance programs, health care, and education. And therefore, there are no increases in your personal taxes, no increases in corporate taxes, and of course, all of your tax shelters are perfectly safe. There is a temporary freeze on how much you can contribute in maximum to your RRSP. However, this is nothing we can't work around. I'm Arthur Papp, and this is Money Matters. Until next time, remember the financial advisor's oath: shelter taxes, not the elderly.
But we are more than individual taxpayers. If you want to figure out the budget's true impact, you have to look at more than the stub on your paycheck. You or a family member could lose your job if the budget accepts a 10% unemployment rate as being necessary to fight inflation. You might feel this budget's significance when you have a heart attack and discover that all the hospital emergency rooms are closed. You may think you are a winner if the government doesn't raise your taxes, but you're really the chump when your taxes remain high, while many corporations get away with paying no taxes at all. Everyone is supposed to cheer when the finance minister announces government spending is being cut. But how loudly are you going to be cheering when your kids have to share textbooks, when your parents can't afford to pay for their medication, and when you get sick because the government has cut back on meat inspectors? A budget is about a lot more than just your taxes. Budgets represent a government's priorities. The choices that the finance minister makes on budget day are not inevitable. If they were, the Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Bankers Association would not put so much effort into telling the minister what decisions to make. The Liberal and Conservative governments have made their values clear in their budgets over the last 10 years. They have not tried to reduce unemployment. In fact, they have followed policies that create high unemployment to keep wages down and profits up. They have cut essential social services. The federal government is cutting back its support for health care, education, and welfare. It is also doing away with national standards for these services. Hospitals are closing, tuition is rising, and food banks cannot keep up with demand.
We're being forced to bear an ever bigger share of the total tax burden. I mean, for instance, in the 1960s, there was a Royal Commission that said that the rich weren't paying their fair share, and then they were paying 20% of the total tax burden. Now they're only paying 7%. So where's the justice?
In the name of reinventing government, they are destroying government, weakening its ability to do things on our behalf. Medical research, air safety, environmental inspection, countless other services are being cut. A healthy public sector is necessary to provide those services which the private sector won't provide because there is no profit to be made in it. Not everyone has lost ground equally. Those folks at the top of the pile can always afford to send their kids to private schools, to go to private clinics. They don't need public services. The Liberal and Conservative budgets have been written for them. The alternative budget is for the rest of us. There are lots of groups in society that don't like what has been going in recent budgets, and they have not been shy about letting the government know how they feel. But governments try to brush them aside. They say that they don't like making cuts, but they have no choice. The deficit has to be cut. The financial markets have to be appeased. Besides, we are told, these critics just represent special interests. All they want is to make sure that their ox isn't gored. And they have no grasp of the big picture. Unions, women's groups, farm organizations, students, anti-poverty associations, these are all more than special interest groups. Between them, they represent the majority of Canadians. But do they have a workable economic plan? Can we do more than criticize and oppose? Or do we have a credible answer to the sneering question, well, what would you do?
Collectively, organizations like labor and social organizations said we've got to come up with some alternatives. There isn't just one answer to any problem that exists. And so the idea came about of putting together a budget that had not only alternatives, but that could be proven to be workable, to be credible, both in a technical way and in a practical way.
It isn't good enough to say we would simply replace their experts with our experts.
26 is cash.
This is what makes up.
The alternative budget process is based on the idea that the solution to our problems will come from Canadians, not only experts. The first alternative budget was put together by social and union activists from across Canada. They put together a plan to rebuild the Canadian economy in 3 years.
We would have helped to create over 1 million new jobs, ensure a stronger and enhanced social safety net, reduce the tax burden on ordinary Canadians. We would have created a more equitable and fair distribution of the tax system.
The alternative budget isn't a behind closed doors affair, nor is it a wish list. People from various communities across Canada come to meetings like this one and hammer out a plan.
Discussion papers are prepared by the steering committee and by the Choices group in Winnipeg, and these discussion papers find their way into local organizations, public forums, community events, where people sit down and discuss, this is the direction that we think we might want to take, what do you think? And then that information is gathered and brought back to the steering committee. So the organizations who are involved, in some cases, you have to make trade-offs, you have to scale back what you would otherwise have wanted to accomplish. And by the end of the budget process, what you have is a budget document that people support because it's been built through a consensus.
And what kind of trouble would we be in if the dollar went so far? Because I'm sure in a workshop that's the first thing that somebody's going to ask.
This is not radical. This is kind of incremental, it's sensible, it's within the experience of Canada, it's within the experience of the U.S.
By making different economic choices in terms of economic policy, that you can generate, one, jobs, and that you can generate the kind of revenues that are needed to sustain a social network. At the same time, those economic policies have to show Canadians that they are realistic choices when it comes to also dealing with the debt and the deficit.
The people who put the alternative budget together don't have their heads stuck in the sand. They know that past economic policies have forced governments to work with less resources.
There is another way of dealing with the debt and deficit in Canada. If we create more jobs, people will be paying taxes, and they'll also be generating more economic activity. At the same time, they won't be people who are unemployed drawing unemployment insurance and needing to depend on social assistance for support.
And they know regular Canadians are feeling overtaxed.
No tax on low and middle income people at all. We're going to introduce a minimum corporate taxes. There are tens of thousands of Canadians who made more than $100,000 in income, and we're going to raise some minimal taxes on them as well. We're going to close some tax loopholes. We're going to increase some taxes on foreign investment. And by and large, this is all going to be minimal, but we're going to tax those who can afford it, not those who can't.
These people are not planning utopia, or even a roadmap to utopia. But if we are to get out of the present crisis, we need an escape plan which can work, one which can generate popular support. There is no greater failure than a failure of the imagination. The people who run this country have no new ideas. Cutting spending and raising unemployment was a disaster half a century ago. It is failing again. And it will be rejected. When that happens, we had better be ready. Without workable, popular proposals, we too shall fail. Perhaps there is no greater challenge than to construct a budget that will capture people's imaginations and loyalties. But this is the sort of imagining that we have to do if we are going to build a future for ourselves and our children. The choices are ours to make.